The steel door slams shut behind him with a finality that steals the air from his lungs. Ethan Monroe stands frozen, his standard-issue orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his lean frame, his green eyes wide as he takes in the cell that will be his home for the next 5 years. Then he sees them. 2 men. Identical twins. Both easily 6'7", powerfully built, with deep brown skin and eyes that track his every movement, like predators assessing prey. "Fresh meat just got interesting," one of them says, his voice a low rumble that vibrates through Ethan's chest. "Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from and don't forget to click subscribe." Ethan Monroe had made one mistake, one monumentally stupid mistake that had cost him everything. The accounting fraud he'd been pressured into by his supervisor had seemed like a victimless crime at the time. "Just moving some numbers around," his boss had said. "No one gets hurt." Except the federal government had noticed, and they'd decided to make an example of someone. His supervisor had vanished to the Cayman Islands with millions. Ethan had been left holding the bag, facing a courtroom full of angry prosecutors and a judge who wanted to send a message about white-collar crime. 5 years in a medium-security federal prison. That had been his sentence. 5 years of his life, gone. His apartment, his car, his savings, all liquidated to pay restitution. His friends had disappeared the moment the indictment came down. His family, what little he had washed their hands of him. At 26 years old, Ethan found himself completely alone, walking into a world he'd never imagined he'd see. The intake process had been dehumanizing. Strip searches, medical exams, fingerprinting, photographs. They'd taken everything that made him Ethan Monroe, accountant, and given him a number instead. Inmate 847392. They'd given him the standard-issue clothing, bedding, and toiletries. They'd explained the rules in monotone voices that suggested they'd given this speech 10,000 times before. Keep your head down. Don't make enemies. Don't join gangs. Follow the schedule. Do your time quietly. Then they'd walked him through endless corridors, past cells where men watched him with calculating eyes, through checkpoints where guards barely glanced up from their phones. And finally, they'd brought him here. Cell Block D, Cell 247, his home for the foreseeable future. He'd been told he'd have cellmates. The prison was overcrowded, 3 men to cells designed for 2. He'd hoped for someone quiet, someone who would let him do his time in peace. What he got instead were the Washington twins, Darius and Marcus Washington. The guard had said their names like everyone should know them, like they were celebrities in this concrete world. Ethan hadn't understood why until he'd walked into the cell and seen them for the first time. They were massive, not just tall, though they were easily the tallest. Men Ethan had ever seen in person, but built like they'd spent every day of their lives sculpting their bodies into weapons. Broad shoulders that seemed to fill the entire cell. Arms thick with muscle that strained against their prison-issued shirts. Chests that looked carved from stone, and faces that were absolutely identical. From their strong jaws to their high cheekbones, to their full lips, to their dark eyes that seemed to see everything. The guard had smirked as he'd pushed Ethan into the cell. "Good luck, white boy. Try to survive your first night." Then he'd walked away, leaving Ethan alone with 2 men who looked at him like he was something interesting, something new, something they wanted to unwrap and examine closely. Now, Ethan stood with his back pressed against the cold steel door, his meager possessions clutched to his chest like a shield, trying to remember how to breathe. The cell was small, maybe 10 feet by 8 feet, with a bunk bed on one wall, a single bed on the other, a toilet and sink in the corner, and absolutely no privacy. The twins had clearly claimed the space already. Personal items were scattered around, books and magazines, a few photographs taped to the walls. This was their territory, and Ethan was the intruder. The twin on the left, sitting on the bottom bunk, leaned back against the wall and crossed his arms over his chest. Up close, Ethan could see the definition of every muscle, the way his shirt pulled tight across his shoulders. "You gonna stand there all day, or you gonna put your stuff down?" "I'm Ethan," he managed to say, his voice coming out higher and thinner than he'd intended. "Ethan Monroe. I'm your new cellmate. I guess you already knew that. I just meant that I'm sorry for the intrusion. I know this is your space and I'll try to stay out of your way." The twin on the right, standing by the small desk bolted to the wall, turned to face him fully. He was identical to his brother in every way Ethan could see, down to the small scar above his left eyebrow. "We know who you are," he said. "Guards told us we were getting fresh meat. White-collar crime, right? Some kind of fraud?" Ethan nodded, unable to find his voice. His heart was hammering so hard he was certain they could hear it. The standing twin moved closer, and Ethan had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. The man's presence was overwhelming, a combination of size and confidence, and barely contained power that made Ethan feel small and vulnerable in ways he'd never experienced. "What's a pretty boy like you doing in a place like this? Didn't your lawyer get you house arrest or some country club minimum security?" "I didn't have money for a good lawyer," Ethan admitted. "Public defender did his best, but the prosecutor wanted to make an example. Said white-collar criminals need to face real consequences." The sitting twin laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Real consequences. That's what they call throwing a sheep to the wolves. You're not gonna last a week in here, pretty boy. Not without protection." Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had heard the stories about what happened to vulnerable inmates in prison. He'd spent the last 3 months since his sentencing terrified of exactly this scenario. Now here he was, locked in a cell with 2 men who could break him in half without effort, and the reality of his situation was crashing down on him with crushing weight. "I'll stay out of your way," he repeated, his voice shaking now despite his attempts to sound calm. "I'll take whatever bunk you don't want. I'll follow your rules. I just want to do my time quietly." The twins exchanged a look, some kind of silent communication passing between them that Ethan couldn't decipher. Then the one who'd been sitting stood up, and suddenly both of them were towering over Ethan, backing him against the door with their sheer presence. "See, that's the problem with pretty boys like you," the first twin said. "You think you can just keep your head down and survive. But this isn't the outside world. You don't have rights here. You don't have privacy. You don't have choices. You have what we allow you to have." Ethan's breathing had gone shallow and rapid. He was on the edge of panic, his fight-or-flight response screaming at him to run, except there was nowhere to run. The door behind him was locked. The cell was tiny. These men filled every available space, their bodies radiating heat and threat in equal measure. "Please," he whispered, "I don't want any trouble." The second twin reached out and Ethan flinched, but the man's hand just took the bedding from Ethan's arms, tossing it onto the single bed against the wall. "That's your bunk. You keep it neat. You keep your stuff on that shelf. You don't touch our things without permission. You follow the schedule. You do what you're told. And maybe, just maybe, we'll make sure no one else in this place gets their hands on you." The implication in those words sent ice through Ethan's veins. "What do you mean?" The first twin leaned in close, so close Ethan could feel his breath against his face. "It means you're ours now, pretty boy. We own this cell. We own everything in it, including you. You want protection in this place. You want to survive your 5 years without getting passed around like currency. Then you belong to us. Simple as that." Ethan's mind was racing, trying to process what they were saying, trying to understand what they wanted from him. "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" The twins smiled, identical expressions that didn't reach their eyes. "We'll explain everything tonight. For now, make your bed. Put your stuff away. We've got yard time in an hour. You'll walk with us. You'll stand with us. You'll show everyone in this place that you're protected, that you're claimed, claimed." The word echoed in Ethan's head, heavy with meaning he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. But what choice did he have? He was locked in this cell with them. He had no allies, no resources, no power. If they wanted to hurt him, they could do it at any time, and no one would stop them. If they were offering protection, even with strings attached, maybe it was better than the alternative. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll do what you say." The second twin nodded, satisfaction crossing his features. "Smart boy. We're gonna get along just fine." They moved back, giving Ethan space to breathe again, and he hurried to his assigned bunk, spreading out the thin mattress and rough blankets with shaking hands. He could feel their eyes on him the entire time, watching every movement. He tried to ignore the sensation, tried to focus on the simple task of making his bed, but his mind kept circling back to their words. "You're ours now. We own everything in it, including you." What had he just agreed to? As if sensing his thoughts, the first twin spoke from where he'd settled back on the bottom bunk. "You're wondering what we want from you." It wasn't a question, but Ethan nodded anyway. The man gestured at himself and his brother. "I'm Darius. He's Marcus. We've been in this place for 3 years now. Got another 7 to go. Armed robbery, in case you're wondering. We didn't shoot anyone, didn't hurt anyone, but we made the mistake of robbing a federal credit union instead of a regular bank. Federal time is harder time." Marcus picked up the story seamlessly. "We learned real quick that the strong survive in here, and the weak get eaten alive. We're strong. We take care of each other. We've built a reputation, and now you're part of that. Being our cellmate means you're under our protection. No one will touch you without going through us." "And what do I have to do in exchange?" Ethan asked, needing to hear it directly. Darius's smile was sharp. "You do what we tell you. You don't question us. You show us respect. And at night, when the lights go out and the guards stop making rounds, you make us happy." There it was. The truth laid bare. Ethan's stomach twisted with fear, and something else he didn't want to name. They wanted him, physically, sexually, in exchange for protection. "I've never," Ethan started, then stopped, his face burning with embarrassment. I haven't been with men before?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You telling us you're straight?" "I don't know what I am," Ethan admitted. "I've never really thought about it. I've been with women, but not many. I focused on work. I didn't have time for relationships." "Well, you've got plenty of time now," Darius said. 5 years to figure yourself out, and you'll figure it out with us. Don't worry, pretty boy. We'll teach you everything you need to know." The casual way they talked about it, like it was already decided, made Ethan's head spin. But underneath the fear, underneath the shock, there was something else stirring, a traitorous curl of heat in his belly, an awareness of how attractive these men were, how powerful, how utterly in control. His body was responding to them, even as his mind screamed danger. "What if I say no?" he asked quietly. The twins exchanged another look. Then Marcus spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Then we turn you out. Tell everyone in the yard that you're not under our protection. By tomorrow, you'll have been claimed by someone else. Someone who won't be as patient. Someone who won't care if you're scared or if it hurts. At least with us, we'll make sure you enjoy it." The words sent a shiver through Ethan's body. He believed them. He could see in their eyes that they meant every word. If he refused them, he'd be fair game for anyone. And something told him that these twins, for all their intimidation, were probably the best option available to him. "I need time to think," he said. "You've got until tonight," Darius said. "After lights out, you decide. Say yes, and we show you what it means to belong to us. Say no, and tomorrow you're on your own." The hour before yard time passed in tense silence. Ethan sat on his bunk, his mind racing through his options, trying to see a way out that didn't involve surrendering his body to 2 virtual strangers. But every scenario he imagined ended worse. Alone and unprotected in a prison full of dangerous men. The twins had been honest with him at least. They'd been direct about what they wanted. That was more than he could expect from anyone else. When the guard called for yard time, Darius and Marcus stood as one unit, fluid and synchronized in their movements. They gestured for Ethan to follow, and he did, falling into step behind them as they walked out of the cell block and into the afternoon sunlight. The yard was a large concrete space surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. Groups of men clustered together, divided along lines Ethan couldn't immediately understand. Some lifted weights, some played basketball, some just stood talking, their eyes constantly scanning for threats or opportunities. The moment the twins stepped into the yard, heads turned. Ethan could feel dozens of eyes assessing him, calculating, wondering. He stayed close to Darius and Marcus, using their bodies as shields. The twins walked to a corner of the yard where several other large men were gathered. They greeted each other with complicated handshakes and low voices. One of them, a massive white guy with a shaved head and neck tattoos, looked Ethan up and down with unconcealed interest. "This your new cellie?" the man asked. Darius stepped slightly in front of Ethan, blocking the man's view. "Yeah, he's with us." The message was clear. "Hands off." The tattooed man nodded his understanding and turned his attention elsewhere. For the next hour, Ethan stood with the twins and their associates, trying to look less terrified than he felt. The twins didn't try to include him in their conversations. They just kept him close, making sure everyone in the yard saw him with them, saw that he was claimed, protected, off limits. By the time they returned to the cell, Ethan's legs were shaking from tension. His mind was made up. He didn't have a choice. Not really. But maybe that made it easier. Maybe if he told himself he had no choice, he could live with what he was about to do. Dinner was served in their cell, trays of unappetizing food shoved through a slot in the door. They ate in silence, Ethan's stomach too knotted to manage more than a few bites. The twins ate mechanically, efficiently, like men accustomed to prison food. As the sun set and the lights dimmed for evening count, Ethan felt his anxiety ratcheting higher. The moment of decision was approaching. Soon the guards would finish their rounds. Soon, he would have to give his answer. The final guard check came at 9. A bored-looking correctional officer glanced into their cell, counted 3 bodies, and moved on. The lights didn't go completely dark, just dimmed to a low amber that left the cell in shadows. In the semi-darkness, both twins turned to look at Ethan, where he sat rigid on his bunk. Darius spoke first, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their cell. "Time to decide, pretty boy. You with us or not?" Ethan's mouth was dry, his heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at these 2 massive men who held all the power, who could make his life heaven or hell, and he made his choice. "Yes, I'm with you." "Smart boy," Marcus said, standing and moving toward Ethan's bunk. "Now come here, let's start your education." Ethan's legs felt like water as he stood, but he forced himself to move. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do anything but surrender to these 2 massive men who held all the power. But where would he run? The door was locked, the guards wouldn't care, and out in the general population without protection, he'd face worse than whatever the twins had planned. Marcus met him halfway, one large hand coming up to cup Ethan's face with surprising gentleness. The touch sent electricity through Ethan's skin, making him gasp softly. He'd expected roughness, aggression, but Marcus's touch was almost reverent, his calloused palm warm against Ethan's cheek. "You're shaking," Marcus observed, his thumb stroking Ethan's cheekbone with feather-light pressure. "Scared?" "Terrified," Ethan admitted, his voice barely a whisper. His heart was hammering so hard he felt dizzy, his breath coming in shallow pants that he couldn't seem to control. "Good," Darius said from behind him. And Ethan realized he'd moved without making a sound, positioning himself at Ethan's back like a predator cutting off escape routes. "Fear keeps you honest, keeps you present. We're not gonna hurt you, pretty boy, but we are gonna own you, every inch of you. You understand what that means?" Ethan nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he did understand. The concept of belonging to someone, of being owned, was foreign to him. He'd spent his whole life being independent, in control, making his own decisions. Now he was being told he'd surrendered all that to 2 men he'd known for less than a day. "Say it," Darius commanded, his voice dropping lower. "Say you understand that you belong to us now." "I understand," Ethan managed, his voice shaking. "I belong to you, both of you." "That's right," Marcus said, his hand sliding from Ethan's face to the back of his neck, his grip firm but not painful. "You're ours, our property, our toy, our pretty boy, and we're going to take real good care of you, teach you things your body's been craving without you even knowing it." Ethan felt Darius's body press against his back, solid and warm and impossibly large, trapping him between the 2 brothers. He should have felt claustrophobic, panicked, suffocated by their nearness. Instead, he felt something else entirely. Safe, somehow. Protected. Like these two massive men had created a shelter just for him, a barrier between him and the dangers that lurked beyond their cell. The contradiction didn't make sense, but Ethan's body didn't care about logic. His body was responding to their heat, their scent, their overwhelming masculine presence in ways that shocked him. Marcus's hand slid from Ethan's neck to his chest, palm flat over his racing heart. Feel that? Feel how fast your heart's beating? That's not just fear, pretty boy. That's excitement. Your body knows what it wants, even if your mind's still catching up. Ethan wanted to deny it, but he couldn't, because Marcus was right. Underneath the terror was something else, something heated and hungry that he'd never felt before. His body was betraying every rational thought, responding to these men with an eagerness that should have shamed him. Darius's hands settled on Ethan's hips, pulling him back more firmly against his chest, letting Ethan feel the evidence of his arousal pressing against him. "You ever been kissed by a man, pretty boy?" "No," Ethan managed, his mouth suddenly dry as sand. "I told you, I've never been with men before. I don't know how to do any of this." "That's what makes it perfect," Marcus said, his eyes darkening with something that looked like hunger mixed with satisfaction. "We get to teach you everything, mold you exactly how we want you, show you pleasures you never imagined. By the time we're done with you, you won't remember what it was like before us." The promise in those words sent shivers down Ethan's spine. Part of him wanted to protest, to insist that he was his own person, that they couldn't just remake him into whatever they desired. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the second, wanted exactly that, wanted to be remade, wanted to belong so completely that he forgot who he'd been before. "Then Marcus is going to be your first," Darius continued, his breath hot against Ethan's ear. "He's going to kiss you, and I'm going to watch, going to feel how your body reacts, how you melt for him. And then it's going to be my turn. We're going to pass you back and forth between us until you can't tell where one of us ends and the other begins. Until you're so full of us you can't think straight." Ethan's knees went weak at the images those words conjured. He would have fallen if Darius hadn't been holding him up. Strong arms wrapped around his waist now, keeping him steady. Marcus leaned in slowly, giving Ethan time to pull away if he wanted to, though they all knew he wouldn't, couldn't, had already surrendered any choice he might have had. The kiss started soft, exploratory, Marcus's lips brushing against Ethan's with surprising gentleness. Nothing like the aggressive claiming Ethan had expected. Marcus kissed like he had all the time in the world, like he was savoring every moment, learning the shape and taste of Ethan's mouth with patient attention. Ethan's eyes fluttered closed, and he felt himself lean into the kiss, drawn by something he couldn't name or resist. His lips parted without conscious decision, an invitation he didn't remember extending. Marcus made a pleased sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss, his tongue sliding against Ethan's in a way that made Ethan's knees weak and his core clench with unfamiliar need. Behind him, Darius's hands tightened on his hips, fingers digging in just slightly, possessive and grounding. "That's it," Darius murmured, his voice rough with approval. "Let him in. Show us how sweet you taste. Show us what a good boy you can be for us." The praise, unexpected and potent, sent warmth flooding through Ethan's chest. When had anyone ever called him good? When had anyone's approval mattered this much? The kiss went on, Marcus taking his time, teaching Ethan how to move his mouth, how to respond, how to give as well as receive. By the time he finally pulled back, Ethan was breathing hard, his lips tingling and swollen, his body pressed fully against Darius now for support because his legs had forgotten how to hold him up. "Look at you," Marcus said, his voice full of satisfaction as he studied Ethan's face. "Already fallen apart for us and we've barely touched you. You're gonna be so perfect, pretty boy. So responsive, so eager once we get you properly trained." "My turn," Darius murmured, spinning Ethan around with effortless strength that reminded Ethan just how powerless he was in their hands, how completely at their mercy. Darius was taller than Marcus by perhaps an inch, his features sharper, his eyes more intense, and his kiss was just as devastating but completely different. Where Marcus had been patient and exploratory, Darius was demanding, claiming Ethan's mouth with an authority that made Ethan whimper and submit without thought. The sound seemed to please both brothers. Marcus pressed against Ethan's back now, his hands exploring, sliding under Ethan's prison-issued shirt to find bare skin. The sensation of those large, warm hands on his ribs, his stomach, mapping his body with confident possession, made Ethan gasp into Darius's mouth. So responsive, Marcus murmured against Ethan's ear, his hands continuing their exploration, learning every dip and curve. "You're already hard for us, aren't you, pretty boy? Your body knows what it wants, even if you're still too scared to admit it." Ethan couldn't deny it. His body had betrayed him completely, arousal evident even through the loose orange pants, pressing insistently against Darius's thigh. He made a sound that might have been agreement, too lost in sensation to form actual words, too overwhelmed by the dual assault of hands and mouths to think clearly. Darius broke the kiss, and both brothers stepped back, leaving Ethan swaying slightly on his feet, disoriented by the sudden loss of contact, cold without their body heat surrounding him. He blinked, trying to clear his head, trying to remember how to stand on his own. "Strip," Darius commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Slowly. We want to see what we're claiming, every inch of what belongs to us now." Ethan's hands shook as he reached for the hem of his shirt. He'd never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, as he did under their twin gazes, both sets of dark eyes tracking his every movement with predatory focus. But he pulled the shirt over his head and let it drop to the floor, revealing his chest. It was lean, lightly defined from his previous gym routine, nothing compared to their powerful builds, and he felt inadequate under their scrutiny. Too small, too soft, too everything that wasn't them. "Beautiful," Marcus said, and the word surprised Ethan so much he looked up, meeting those intense eyes. "You're perfect, pretty boy. Exactly what we wanted. Soft where we're hard, smooth where we're rough, made to fit between us like you were designed for this." "The pants," Darius added, his voice rougher now, strained with want that made Ethan feel powerful despite his powerlessness. "Everything comes off. We want to see all of you. No hiding. Not ever again." Ethan pushed the pants and boxers down together, stepping out of them and standing completely naked before the twins. He wanted to cover himself, wanted to hide his obvious arousal, wanted to disappear entirely. But he forced his hands to stay at his sides, fists clenched at his thighs. This was what he'd agreed to. This was the price of protection, of survival, of belonging. Both brothers circled him slowly, predators assessing their prey from every angle. Ethan felt their eyes like physical touches, burning across his skin, studying every vulnerability, every curve, every imperfection. He'd never been so thoroughly examined, so completely seen, and the exposure made him tremble. "Perfect," Darius said finally, completing his circle and coming to stand in front of Ethan again. "So fucking perfect. Look at him, Marcus. Look at what's ours now." Marcus hummed his agreement, his hand reaching out to trace down Ethan's spine, making him arch involuntarily. "Gonna mark every inch of this body. Gonna teach it to crave our touch, our taste, our everything. By morning, there won't be a part of you that doesn't belong to us." "Get on your bunk," Darius said, his voice rough with barely contained desire. "On your back. We're not going to take you tonight, not completely, but we're going to touch you everywhere. Going to learn what makes you moan, what makes you beg, what makes you forget you were ever scared. Going to map every sensitive spot so we know exactly how to play you tomorrow." Ethan climbed onto his narrow bunk with shaking limbs, lying back against the thin pillow, acutely aware of how small he felt, how vulnerable, stretched out naked while they remained clothed. The twins shed their own shirts in unison, revealing bodies that made Ethan's mouth go dry. They were magnificent, all muscle and power and masculine beauty, their dark skin gleaming in the dim light. When they removed their pants, Ethan's eyes widened at the evidence of their arousal, thick and impressive and intimidating, in ways that made his stomach clench with nervousness and anticipation. They climbed onto the bunk on either side of him, somehow fitting 3 bodies on a bed meant for one, their larger frames dwarfing his. The heat of them surrounded Ethan, their hands beginning to explore his body with thorough, methodical attention. Marcus traced patterns on his chest, while Darius's hand slid down his stomach, making his muscles contract and flutter under the touch. "We're gonna make you feel so good," Darius promised, his hand wrapping around Ethan's hardness with confident, assured pressure that made Ethan gasp and arch. "Gonna teach this body to crave us, to need us. By tomorrow morning, you're gonna know exactly who you belong to. Gonna wake up sore and satisfied and marked as ours." And then they began their lesson in earnest, hands and mouths working in perfect synchronization, two halves of a whole, united in their goal of claiming every inch of Ethan Monroe. He tried to stay quiet, aware that other inmates might hear through the thin walls, but soft sounds escaped him anyway, as pleasure built higher and higher under their skilled, relentless touch. This was his life now. These men owned him. And God help him, his body was already learning to love it. The twins worked him over with patient thoroughness, taking turns, sometimes working together, mapping every sensitive spot on his body with methodical precision. When Marcus's mouth closed around him, hot and wet and perfect, Ethan had to bite his own hand to keep from crying out, the sensation overwhelming every rational thought. When Darius kissed him deeply while Marcus continued his attentions below, Ethan felt himself flying apart, pleasure crashing through him in waves that left him trembling and gasping. "Good boy," Darius murmured as Ethan came back to himself, his voice full of satisfaction and possession. "Such a good boy for us. Tomorrow night we'll go further, push you more. But tonight was just a taste, just enough to teach your body what's coming, to make you crave us the way we crave you." They cleaned him gently with a damp towel, tender in a way that confused Ethan more than the dominance had. He'd expected them to use him and discard him, but instead, they cared for him, made sure he was comfortable, arranged his blanket over him like he mattered beyond just being a body to warm their bed. Then they arranged themselves on their own bunks, leaving him alone to process what had just happened, giving him space when he thought he'd wanted none. Ethan lay in the darkness, his body satisfied, but his mind reeling. He'd just let two men touch him in ways no man ever had. He'd enjoyed it, more than enjoyed it. He'd craved it with an intensity that terrified him. What did that make him? Who was he now? Was he gay? Bisexual? Or just desperate and alone and willing to do anything to survive? Did the labels even matter in here? "Sleep," Marcus said softly from the darkness, somehow sensing Ethan's churning thoughts. "Tomorrow's another day. You did good tonight, pretty boy. Real good. We're proud of you. That took courage, surrendering to us like that. Takes a strong man to submit." The word surprised Ethan. He'd thought submission meant weakness. But maybe Marcus was right. Maybe there was strength in choosing to surrender, in trusting them with his body, in accepting his new reality instead of fighting uselessly against it. Ethan closed his eyes and, surprisingly, sleep came quickly, pulling him under before he could spiral further into doubt and fear. His last conscious thought was that for the first time since his arrest, he didn't feel completely alone. He had protection. He had purpose. He belonged to someone, even if that belonging came at a price his former self would never have imagined paying. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Ethan woke to the harsh clang of the morning bell and the fluorescent lights snapping on at full brightness. For a moment, he was disoriented, wondering why his body ached in unfamiliar places, why he felt simultaneously satisfied and sore. Then memory crashed back and heat flooded his face. Last night, the twins. Everything they'd done to him. Everything he'd let them do. He sat up slowly, expecting to find Darius and Marcus watching him with those predatory eyes. But their bunks were empty. Voices drifted from the corridor outside, the sounds of men heading to breakfast. Ethan grabbed his clothes from where they'd been neatly folded on his shelf. Someone had organized them while he slept, and dressed quickly. When he emerged from the cell, both twins were waiting for him, flanking the doorway like sentries. They looked freshly showered, their prison uniforms somehow fitting them better than anyone else's, and when they saw him, matching smiles crossed their faces. "Mornin', pretty boy," Darius said, his voice low enough that only Ethan could hear. "Sleep well?" Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice yet. His throat felt raw, though he couldn't remember screaming. Or maybe he could. Maybe those muffled sounds he'd made while Marcus's mouth worked him over had been louder than he'd thought. "Good," Marcus said, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the dining hall. "Because tonight, we're gonna push you a little further. See what else that pretty body of yours can handle." The casual way they talked about it, like they were discussing the weather instead of his complete surrender, made Ethan's stomach flutter with nerves and something dangerously close to anticipation. His body remembered their touch, already craved more. The dining hall was chaos. Hundreds of men in orange jumpsuits lined up for trays of food that looked barely edible. The twins guided Ethan to a table in the corner where several of the men from yesterday's yard time were already sitting. The tattooed white guy, whose name Ethan learned was Tank, nodded at him in acknowledgement. "So he survived his first night," Tank said with a knowing grin. "Guess the Washington brothers weren't too rough on him." "We broke him in gentle," Darius said, sitting down with his tray. "Tonight we'll see how much he can really take." The casual discussion of Ethan's body like he wasn't sitting right there should have angered him. Instead, it sent heat through his belly. He was theirs. Everyone at this table knew it. Everyone in this prison would know it soon. There was something freeing about that, about not having to pretend or hide or maintain some illusion of control. The food was as bad as it looked, but Ethan forced himself to eat. He'd need his strength, he realized. The twins were patient, but they had expectations. They'd told him last night that they'd go further tonight, and Ethan knew what that meant. They'd want more than just touching. They'd want all of him. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, his body responded with interest, with readiness. What was happening to him? How could one night change him so completely? After breakfast came work detail. Ethan was assigned to the prison library, which meant sorting books and helping with inventory, while a bored guard played on his phone. It was easy work, mindless, and it gave Ethan too much time to think. He thought about his old life, the apartment he'd never see again, the job that had led to his downfall, the loneliness that had defined his existence for so long. He'd told himself he was focused, driven, building something meaningful, but the truth was he'd been empty. Going through motions, existing but not living. Here, in this concrete cage, stripped of everything he'd thought defined him, Ethan felt more alive than he had in years. The twins had awakened something in him. Desire, yes, but also purpose. He belonged to them. He had a role to play. And for the first time in his life, someone actually wanted him. Not for what he could do or what he could provide, but for himself. For his body, his responses, his surrender. It was twisted probably. Stockholm Syndrome or prison psychology or a dozen other clinical terms. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to care about the labels. All he knew was that when Darius and Marcus touched him, he felt real, felt seen, felt like he mattered. Lunch was the same unappetizing slop as breakfast. Ethan ate mechanically, his mind elsewhere, already anticipating nightfall. He caught himself watching the twins, studying the way they moved, the way they interacted with other inmates with confidence that bordered on arrogance but never quite crossed the line. They were respected here, feared maybe, but also admired. Aligning himself with them had been the smartest decision he could have made. The afternoon was yard time again. Ethan walked with the twins to their usual corner, standing silent while they talked with their associates about prison politics he didn't understand yet. Transfers, new arrivals, tensions between different groups. It was a whole ecosystem he'd never imagined existed. At one point, a lean Hispanic man approached, his eyes fixed on Ethan with obvious interest. Before he could speak, Darius stepped between them, his massive frame blocking Ethan completely. "He's claimed," Darius said flatly. "Move along." The man raised his hands in surrender and walked away, but Ethan had seen the hunger in his eyes. Without the twins' protection, he'd already be someone else's toy. The thought sent a chill through him. "You see that?" Marcus said quietly once the man was gone. "That's why you need us. That's why you're going to give us everything we ask for. Because out here, you're prey. In our cell, you're protected. You're ours. And we take care of what belongs to us." Ethan nodded his understanding. The dynamic was crystal clear now. His body was the price of safety. And honestly, given the alternatives, it wasn't a bad deal, especially since his body seemed more than willing to pay it. Dinner came and went. The sun set. The lights dimmed. And finally, after evening count, they were alone again in their cell. Ethan's heart raced as both twins turned to face him with identical expressions of hungry anticipation. "Tonight, you're gonna learn what it means to really belong to us," Darius said, pulling his shirt over his head. "Tonight, we're gonna claim you completely. You ready for that, pretty boy?" Ethan swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "Yes." "Good answer," Marcus said, stripping as well. "Now get naked and get on that bunk. On your hands and knees this time. We're gonna prepare you proper." Ethan's hands shook as he undressed, but he did as instructed, positioning himself as ordered. The vulnerability of the position wasn't lost on him, but he forced himself to stay still as he heard the twins moving behind him. "So pretty," Darius murmured, his hand tracing down Ethan's spine. "Gonna look even prettier when you're taking us. Both of us. We're gonna share you every night, pretty boy. One of us in that sweet mouth, one of us inside you. Then we'll switch. By morning you're gonna know exactly who owns you." The words should have scared him. Instead, they sent pleasure spiraling through his body. He wanted this. God help him. He wanted to be claimed by them, wanted to feel them inside him, wanted to surrender completely. Marcus's hand joined Darius's, both of them touching him now, preparing him with patient thoroughness. They used what little commissary lube they had, working him open gradually, carefully, making sure he was ready. And all the while they murmured to him, praising him, telling him how good he was being, how perfect he felt, how much they were going to enjoy this. By the time they deemed him ready, Ethan was trembling with need, his body aching for more than just their fingers. "Please," he heard himself whisper. "Please, We know what you need," Darius said, positioning himself, "and we're going to give it to you, every single inch." The first breach was intense, pressure and fullness that bordered on too much. Ethan bit his pillow to muffle his sounds, but Darius's hands on his hips held him steady, kept him from pulling away. "Breathe," Marcus coached, his hand stroking Ethan's back. "Relax, let him in. It gets better, pretty boy. I promise." And it did. As his body adjusted, as Darius began to move with slow, deep thrusts, pleasure began to bloom through the discomfort. Ethan found himself pushing back, taking more, chasing the sensation. "That's it," Darius groaned. "Knew you'd love this. Knew you were made for us." When Marcus moved to kneel in front of Ethan, offering himself to Ethan's mouth, Ethan took him without hesitation. The twins had been right. He was theirs completely now. Mind, body, and something deeper he couldn't name. They moved together in perfect rhythm, one massive body behind him, one in front, completely surrounding him, filling him, owning him. Ethan lost track of time, lost track of everything except sensation and the low voices praising him, encouraging him, claiming him with every thrust. When his own release finally crashed through him, untouched, just from the intensity of being filled and used by both brothers, Ethan understood with absolute clarity what had happened. He wasn't Ethan Monroe, white-collar criminal anymore. He was their pretty boy, their toy, their possession, and he'd never felt more free. They held him afterward, both of them, their large bodies creating a warm cocoon around his smaller frame. Darius pressed kisses to his shoulder, while Marcus stroked his hair, both of them gentle now, tender in the aftermath. "You did so good," Marcus murmured. "Took us both so perfect. You're ours now, pretty boy, completely ours." And Ethan, sated and exhausted and happier than he had any right to be, whispered back, "Yes, I'm yours." The days blurred together after that. A routine established itself. Mornings of shared breakfast with the twins' crew, work details that gave Ethan time to think and anticipate, afternoons in the yard standing close to his protectors, evenings of communal dinner, and nights, glorious nights, when the lights dimmed and the twins claimed him again and again in increasingly creative ways. Ethan learned their preferences, their favorite positions, what made each of them groan and lose control. He learned that Darius liked to watch before participating, enjoyed seeing Marcus take Ethan first, his dark eyes tracking every movement with hungry appreciation. He learned that Marcus was more vocal, more likely to praise and encourage, whispering filthy, beautiful things that made Ethan burn with pleasure and embarrassment in equal measure. He learned that both of them were possessive and jealous and would destroy anyone who tried to touch what belonged to them. He learned that he loved it, all of it. The claiming, the ownership, the complete surrender of control. The shame he'd expected never came. Instead, Ethan felt himself blooming in their attention like a flower finding sun after years of darkness. His body grew stronger from regular meals and yard time, muscle building on his previously lean frame. His confidence increased as he became known as the Washington brothers' property, their claimed boy who walked with them like a shadow. No one bothered him. No one threatened him. He was protected, valued, desired in ways that made him feel more alive than he ever had on the outside. 2 weeks in, Ethan witnessed firsthand what happened to men who didn't have protection. A new inmate arrived, a skinny kid barely 20 with terrified eyes and trembling hands. The twins watched the kid like everyone else did, assessing, calculating, but made no move to claim him. That privilege went to a massive biker-looking guy named Reaper, who cornered the kid in the showers the second night. Ethan heard the muffled sounds, the pleading that turned to sobbing, the brutal reality of prison hierarchy being enforced. He stood frozen outside the shower area, listening to another man's suffering, and felt sick with guilt and gratitude in equal measure. That could have been him. That should have been him. But the twins had chosen him first, claimed him before anyone else could, and now he was safe while that kid learned the hard way what survival cost in this place. Later that night, as Darius moved inside him with measured, deliberate strokes while Marcus kissed him deep enough to swallow his moans, Ethan understood with crystal clarity how lucky he was. The twins were hard men, dangerous men, but they were careful with him in ways that others wouldn't be. They prepared him properly. They made sure he felt pleasure along with the taking. They held him afterward and told him he was good, perfect, theirs. "You're thinking too much," Darius murmured, his hand cupping Ethan's face and turning it toward him. "Stay present with us, pretty boy. Stay here in this moment where you're safe and ours." "Sorry," Ethan gasped, his body arching as Darius hit that perfect spot inside him that made stars explode behind his eyes. That new kid, I heard what happened to him." Marcus's hand wrapped around Ethan's arousal, stroking in time with Darius's thrusts. "That's not your burden to carry. You made your choice. You're ours. What happens to others isn't your concern." "But it could have been me," Ethan insisted, even as pleasure built toward breaking. "If you hadn't chosen me first." "But we did," Darius said, his voice going rough as his control frayed. "We saw you and we claimed you, and that's all that matters. Now stop thinking and just feel. Feel us inside you. Feel how much we want you. Feel how perfectly you fit between us." And Ethan did, surrendering to sensation, to the overwhelming reality of being filled and stroked and claimed by two men who treated him like something precious, even as they used his body for their pleasure. When he came, it was with their names on his lips, a prayer and a surrender, and an acknowledgement that he belonged to them completely. A month into his sentence, Ethan was in the library when another inmate approached him. The man was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and calculating eyes that had seen too much. He carried books like they were weapons, moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd survived in here through intelligence rather than strength. "You're with the Washington twins?" he said without preamble, his voice low enough not to carry. "Yes," Ethan replied, immediately on guard. His hand moved subtly toward the alarm button under the desk, ready to call for help if needed. "They treating you right? Not hurting you?" The question surprised Ethan. He'd expected threat or proposition or crude commentary, not concern. "They're good to me." "Why?" The man shrugged, setting his books down on the return counter. "Just checking. Those boys have a reputation. Strong, protective, but fair. You could have ended up with worse. Much worse. I've been in here 15 years. I've seen what happens to pretty boys like you when they end up with the wrong protector. Consider yourself lucky." "I know," Ethan admitted, relaxing slightly. "I know exactly how lucky I am." "Do you, though?" The man's eyes were sharp, assessing. "Because there's lucky, and then there's trapped. Just remember, they're in for armed robbery. They've got 7 more years minimum, maybe more if they slip up and add time. You've only got 5. Eventually, you're gonna get out and they're gonna still be in here. Don't let yourself forget that you've got a life waiting outside these walls. Don't let them make you forget who you were before this place changed you." The words haunted Ethan for days, echoing in his mind during work details and yard time, and especially at night when the twins claimed him with possessive hands and hungry mouths. He'd been so focused on surviving each day that he hadn't thought about the future, about what would happen when his sentence ended, and he walked free, while Darius and Marcus remained locked up behind concrete and steel and razor wire. Would they expect him to wait? Would he want to? Could he even imagine a life without them now that they'd become his entire world? The question burned in his mind until he couldn't contain it anymore. That night, after the twins had taken their pleasure and were settling into their bunks, muscles relaxed, and breathe an evening out, Ethan found his voice cutting through the darkness. "What happens when I get out? I mean, in 5 years when my sentence is done and I walk through those gates." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with unspoken thoughts and carefully controlled reactions. Finally, Marcus spoke from the bottom bunk, his voice thoughtful in a way it rarely was. "We've been thinking about that. A lot, actually. We want you to wait for us," Darius added from across the cell. "On the outside. We'll write every week. You'll visit as often as they allow. And when we get out in 7 years, we'll find you again. Build something real together. Something that lasts." "You want me to wait 7 years?" Ethan asked, incredulous at the audacity of the request, even as part of him warmed at the implication that they wanted him beyond these walls, beyond this forced proximity. "We want you to live your life," Marcus clarified, his voice careful. "We're not asking you to put everything on hold. Get a job, make friends, hell, date if you need to. But if what we have means as much to you as it does to us, then yeah, we want you to remember us. Save a place for us when we're free. Don't forget what we built in here." "How can I forget?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking with emotion he didn't try to hide. "You've changed everything about me. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I wanted, about who I am. I'm not the same person who walked into this cell 3 months ago." "Good," Darius said firmly. "That person was empty, going through motions. We gave you purpose, gave you pleasure, taught you what it means to truly belong to someone. You think you can just walk away from that and go back to your old life like none of this happened?" "I don't want to walk away," Ethan admitted, the truth spilling out before he could stop it. "But 7 years is a long time. I'll be 33 when you get out. What if I've moved on? What if I've built a life that doesn't have room for what we have in here? What if the outside world changes how I feel?" "Then we'll deal with it," Marcus said, and there was steel in his voice beneath the understanding. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're ours for life, pretty boy. Whether you're in here or out there, whether it's been 5 years or 50, you're going to carry us with you everywhere you go." The certainty in his voice should have felt oppressive, like a chain around Ethan's neck. Instead, it felt like freedom, like permission to stop fighting against the truth of what he'd become. "I'll wait," Ethan heard himself say, the promise falling from his lips like a vow. "I don't know what life is going to look like when I get out, but I'll wait for you both, I swear it. 7 years, 70 years, however long it takes. You're right, I'm yours, and I think I always will be." The twins climbed into his bunk that night, all 3 of them squeezed into the narrow space like they'd done a dozen times before. But this time felt different, more permanent. They held him between them like he was precious, like he was something worth keeping, worth protecting, worth claiming over and over until the end of time. "We love you," Darius whispered, and it was the first time either of them had said it directly, not as part of dirty talk or in the heat of passion, but as simple truth spoken in the darkness. You know that, right? This isn't just about sex or protection or prison politics. We fucking love you, pretty boy. Love what you've become with us. Love who you are when you let yourself be vulnerable. Love every sound you make and every way your body responds to us. Tears stung Ethan's eyes, hot and unexpected. I love you too, he whispered back, his voice breaking on the words. Both of you. I didn't know I could feel this much. Didn't know I was capable of this kind of connection. You've shown me things about myself I never would have discovered on my own. Then we did what we were meant to do, Marcus said, his hand stroking Ethan's hair with gentle affection. We found each other when we all needed it most. Made something beautiful out of something ugly. That's worth holding on to, worth fighting for, worth waiting for. They made love that night instead of just having sex. Slow and tender and meaningful. The twins taking turns worshiping Ethan's body, showing him without words how much he meant to them, how deeply they'd embedded themselves in his heart and soul and skin. And Ethan gave himself over completely, holding nothing back, surrendering not just his body but his heart, his future, his everything. When they finally settled into sleep, tangled together like three parts of a whole, Ethan felt peace settle over him for the first time in his life. This was home. Not the cell or the prison or the concrete walls, but this feeling, this belonging, this love that existed in the darkest place imaginable, and somehow shone brighter than anything he'd known in the free world. The remaining 4 years of Ethan's sentence passed both quickly and slowly. Slowly because prison time always dragged, because days were monotonous and restrictive, because being locked up meant watching life happen to other people, while you stayed frozen in place. Quickly because the nights with Darius and Marcus made everything bearable, even beautiful in its own twisted way, because love had a way of making time both infinite and fleeting. They settled into their relationship with surprising ease. In public, Ethan was their property, their claimed toy that everyone knew better than to touch. In private, in their cell, when the lights dimmed and the guards finished their rounds, he was their lover, their partner, the missing piece that made them complete. They taught him about life, about survival, about loyalty and honor and what really mattered when everything else was stripped away. And Ethan taught them about softness, about vulnerability, about the kind of love that existed even in the darkest places, and maybe especially in the darkest places, where it was needed most desperately. When fights broke out in the yard, the twins protected Ethan without hesitation, their bodies becoming shields, their reputation becoming armor that kept him safe from violence and predators. When Ethan got sick with the flu, racked with fever and chills, they tended to him with gentle care that belied their dangerous reputation, bringing him water and cold compresses and holding him through the worst of it. When new inmates arrived looking for vulnerable targets, fresh meat to claim and break, Darius and Marcus made it crystal clear that Ethan was off limits, protected, owned. And when Ethan struggled with the reality of being locked up, missing the outside world, questioning who he'd become and whether he could ever go back to who he'd been, both brothers held him and reminded him that he was stronger than he thought, more resilient than he knew, more loved than he'd ever imagined possible. They created a little family in that cell, 3 men who shouldn't have fit together, but somehow did. 3 men who found love in the least likely place imaginable. 3 men who learned that home wasn't a location, but a feeling, and they'd found it in each other's arms despite everything working against them. Ethan's release date approached faster than he wanted. Part of him had grown comfortable in the routine, in the certainty of his place with the twins, in the simplicity of having his entire world reduced to these concrete walls and these 2 massive men who loved him. The outside world seemed scary now, full of unknowns and expectations he wasn't sure he could meet, full of people who would judge him for what he'd become, full of temptations and pressures that might erode what he'd built in here. The night before his release, none of them slept. They made love for hours, memorizing each other's bodies with desperate hands and hungry mouths, storing up sensations and sounds and moments for the long separation ahead. The twins were rougher than usual, more possessive, marking Ethan in ways that would fade from his skin, but leave permanent imprints on his soul, claiming him one last time before the world took him away from them. "You're ours," Darius said fiercely, holding Ethan's face between his large hands, forcing eye contact that burned with intensity and desperation and love so fierce it hurt. "Distance doesn't change that. Time doesn't change that. You belong to us, pretty boy. Always, forever, until we're dust and bones and nothing but memory. Do you understand? And you belong to me," Ethan replied, surprising himself with the claim, with the ferocity of his own possession. "Both of you? You're mine as much as I'm yours. I'll be waiting when you get out. 7 years exactly. I swear it on everything I am. I'll be right there at those gates, ready to start the next chapter of our life together." The morning came too soon, cruel and inevitable. A guard appeared at their cell with Ethan's release papers, his face impassive to the emotional devastation happening in front of him. "Time to go, Monroe. You're a free man. Pack your stuff and let's move." Ethan dressed in the civilian clothes that had been provided by the prison, cheap jeans and a basic shirt that felt foreign after years in prison orange. He turned to face the twins one last time, memorizing their faces, the way they stood shoulder to shoulder like two halves of a whole, the way their eyes held both pride and pain at his departure. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "Both of you, more than I've ever loved anything. I'll write every week like clockwork. I'll visit as often as they let me, and I'll be right here, waiting the day you walk out those gates, ready to build the life we've dreamed about." "We love you too," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Be safe out there, build a good life, stay clean, and remember you're ours. That doesn't change just because you're free. Always yours," Ethan promised, his vision blurring with tears he didn't bother wiping away. "Forever yours, until the end of everything." The walk out of the prison was surreal, like moving through a dream or a nightmare. Through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times but wouldn't walk again, past cells full of men he'd come to know, some nodding their respect, others watching with envy or relief or indifference. Through checkpoints and security stations until finally, impossibly, he was standing outside the main gate with the sun on his face and the sound of traffic in his ears and absolute freedom stretching before him like an endless desert he had no map to cross. He looked back once at the imposing concrete structure that had been his home for 5 years, his prison and his sanctuary in equal measure. Somewhere inside those walls, 2 men were returning to their cell, to the space they'd shared with him, to bunks that would feel too empty without his presence between them. Ethan pulled out the cheap phone he'd been given by his parole officer and set a reminder with shaking hands. 7 years from today, that's when Darius and Marcus would be released, barring any added time or complications. 7 years he'd have to build a life, to stay clean, to prepare a place for them in the world outside these walls. It seemed impossible. An eternity stretched between now and then. But then again, 5 years ago, Ethan never would have imagined he'd fall in love with 2 prisoners who claimed him as their property and taught him what it meant to truly belong to someone. Never would have imagined that he'd give himself so completely, so willingly, so joyfully to 2 men who represented everything he thought he'd never want or need. Life had a way of surprising you, of taking your carefully laid plans and shredding them into confetti, of showing you that what you thought you knew about yourself was just a surface veneer hiding depths you'd never explored. He started walking toward the bus stop, toward halfway houses and parole requirements and the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life from ashes and ruins. But in his heart, part of him remained in cell 247 with 2 massive men who'd shown him that, even in the darkest places, love could bloom brighter than any star. And 7 years from now, he'd be standing at these gates again, waiting, watching, ready. Because he'd made a promise, sealed with his body and his heart and his soul. And Ethan Monroe might have been many things over the years, a criminal, a prisoner, a claimed toy, an owned boy. But he was also a man who kept his word, no matter how long the wait, no matter how hard the journey. The Washington brothers had owned him from that first terrifying night, and they'd own him for the rest of his life, wherever that life took him. That was the greatest freedom he'd ever known.